Unlimited Void, also known as Infinite Void, is Satoru Gojo's domain expansion. Later in the series, Okatsu Yuta also uses it when he takes control of Gojo's body in the final battle against Sukuna. Visually, Unlimited Void is both stunning and terrifying. It looks like a vast, space-like dimension filled with a black hole, distant galaxies, and scattered white patches. When Gojo activates it, he pulls his targets into the Limitless itself, which is so devastating that Nanami once said that any curse caught inside is basically guaranteed to lose. Inside Unlimited Void, Gojo's targets enter a trance-like state. At first, it feels like they can't see or feel anything, but in reality, they're actually seeing and feeling everything all at once. The endless flood of information overloads their brains, which leaves them completely paralyzed and unable to react. Gojo calls it ironic. His targets are given everything, yet they're helplessly dying, unable to move. However, this effect doesn't apply to anyone Gojo touches. For example, when he overpowered Jogo's domain, he spared him by holding his head, allowing him to interrogate him about his motives and accomplices. But in chapter 227, Sukuna exploited this weakness by positioning himself behind Gojo and touching him. This allowed Sukuna to destroy Unlimited Void from the outside, boosting his power by focusing his effective range and using a binding vow to negate Malevolent Shrine's sure hit effect. Gojo used Unlimited Void again during the Shibuya incident, but this time he only activated it for 0.2 seconds to minimize the damage. The problem was he was surrounded by countless innocent non-sorcerers. If he expanded his domain fully, they would get crushed between the barrier and the domain itself, and this means it's the end for them. By putting Gojo in a situation where his only option is to cast a domain, it forces him to make a tough choice. If he activates Unlimited Void, the innocent people around him will be overwhelmed by the domain's effects and die instantly. That means using it would be killing them with his own hands. Kenjaku was sure that Gojo wouldn't risk it, but he was completely wrong. Gojo bet everything on a 0.2 second domain expansion. While this is just a rough estimate, the amount of information that flooded the brains of non-sorcerers at that moment was equivalent to half a year's worth. In a span of 299 seconds, Gojo annihilated approximately 1,000 transfigured humans before deactivating the domain. But that's not all. Gojo can actually adjust Unlimited Void. He can shrink it to the size of a basketball and keep it up there for 3 minutes and 9 seconds. During his fight with Sukuna, Gojo used Unlimited Void 5 times. On the 5th use, he expanded it to 0.01 seconds faster, catching Sukuna off guard and landing a severe blow. Malevolent Shrine collapsed first, but Sukuna countered immediately, summoning Maharaga, who adapted to Unlimited Void in an instant. With Gojo constantly using reverse curse technique and exhausting himself, he failed to activate it the 6th time. After taking over Gojo's body, Yuta gained access to both Unlimited Void and Limitless. He then expanded Unlimited Void against Sukuna using a smaller barrier, a strategy that Gojo had planned as a countermeasure. With this shrunken version, Yuta could resist Malevolent Shrine for about 3 minutes, which was only possible thanks to the switch training he did with Gojo. However, because he wasn't experienced with Hollow Purple, his domain collapsed too soon, though it still managed to enter Sukuna. Malevolent Shrine is Sukuna's domain expansion, and it's easily one of the most powerful in Jujutsu Kaisen. We first see Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine when he completely stomped the Finger Bearer curse and later reclaimed his fingers. He ended up cutting the cursed spirit way more than he expected because he originally only planned to slice it up into 3 pieces. Malevolent Shrine looks straight up terrifying, like a twisted, cursed version of a Buddhist shrine. It's covered in skulls, wide open mouths, and eerie decorations that make it feel super unsettling. But its incomplete version is even worse. It turns into a giant, fleshy horror with horns, glowing eyes, and massive human-like hands reaching out. But what really makes Malevolent Shrine so deadly is its sure hit slashing attacks, Cleave and Dismantle. Cleave is used to cut down anything with cursed energy, while Dismantle slices inanimate objects. Unlike most domains, which create a separate space with a barrier, Malevolent Shrine expands into reality itself. And by allowing an escape route, a binding vow is formed, boosting its guaranteed hit range to 200 meters. During the Shibuya incident, Sukuna reduced the range to 140 meters so that Fushiguro Megumi wouldn't be affected. But with all these details, it means there's no way to break Malevolent Shrine from the outside. Until it disappears, everything inside its range will keep getting slashed non-stop. The only way to stop it is by hurting Sukuna badly enough that he can't maintain it. In fact, when Sukuna used Malevolent Shrine in Shibuya, it didn't just kill countless non-sorcerers, it also cut off Inumaki's arm. During his fight with Gojo, Sukuna only used Malevolent Shrine 3 times before he couldn't activate it anymore. Even though Unlimited Void only hit him for less than 10 seconds, the brain damage was so severe that he physically couldn't open his domain again. We mentioned this earlier, but during Sukuna's fight with Gojo, it was also revealed that Sukuna could use a binding vow to negate Malevolent Shrine's guaranteed hit effect inside Gojo's domain. This allowed him to increase its output even further outside the domain, which is also why Unlimited Void collapsed during their battle. After getting blasted by 7 black flashes, Sukuna was backed into a corner and forced to activate an improvised Malevolent Shrine. But how did he pull this off? Well, it all comes down to a few key things. First, he changed his palm signs, which altered his domain activation. Second, he used a curse technique in a different part of his brain that wasn't affected by Unlimited Void. Third, thanks to his barrier technique surviving those black flashes, he pulled off a last-minute binding vow. This allowed him to expand the Malevolent Shrine without losing any power or range. The problem was that this Malevolent Shrine was incomplete. Sukuna could only hold it for 99 seconds. But, by maintaining the difficulty of his barrier technique and enveloping his domain in an outer shelled barrier, Sukuna was able to sense Maki despite her lack of cursed energy. However, during his fight against Yuta, who was using Gojo's body, Sukuna found a way to remove the 99-second limit by restricting Malevolent Shrine's range to just the outline of Yuta's domain. In exchange, he got a 3-minute time limit, which gave him enough time to destroy Unlimited Void and expand his effective range again. And now for a cool little fact. Malevolent Shrine's name comes from the Japanese term Fukuma Mizushi, which has some interesting meanings. We'll skip the Fukuma part and focus on Mizushi. Depending on the context, Mizushi can mean either shrine or kitchen, and that's kinda hilarious when you think about it. Sukuna has Cleave and Dismantle, both slicing techniques, and Divine Flame, which is basically fire. Put all that together, and he's got the perfect skill set for cooking in more ways than one. Authentic Mutual Love is Yuta Akotsu's domain expansion, activated through his innate technique, Copy. Depending on the translation, it's also called All-Encompassing Unequivocal Love. This domain looks like a battlefield, filled with cross-shaped structures covered in katanas. The whole area is surrounded by Mizuhiki, which are decorative cords used in rituals. Authentic Mutual Love allows Yuta to choose any of his copy techniques to imbue the barrier with, as the domain's sure hit effect. His remaining copy techniques are scattered randomly among the katanas within the domain. However, even though only Yuta can utilize them, not even he knows which katana contains which technique until he picks it up. Each katana shatters after a single use, but there's no limit to how many can appear. Yuta first attempted to expand his domain against Ryo Ishiguri and Takaka Uru in the Sendai Colony battle. However, interference from Kuro Urushi disrupted their overlapping domains before they could fully form. Another reason is that three-way domain duels in general are too complicated, so because of the difference between the internal and external conditions for building each barrier, they will collapse. Take note of this, because this is also the reason why we will not cover Ryo Ishiguri and Takaka Uro's domains in this video. While it's mentioned in the manga that they have their own domain expansions, they are never actually shown. Yuta used Authentic Mutual Love against Sukuna, thinking it could finally end him and remove him from Megumi's body, specifically with Angel's technique and Yuji's soul-seizing punches. During that fight, Yuta copied numerous techniques from other sorcerers. The first sword he picked up was imbued with Takaka Uru's sky manipulation, and he used Thin Icebreaker to amplify his attacks and slash Sukuna's face. After that, he picked up a sword embedded with Drew Vlachtawala's technique and summoned 3 Shikigami that formed an inviolable slashing barrier around Sukuna. The third sword contained Inumaki's cursed speech, and he followed it up with another Thin Icebreaker. With the next sword, Yuta used the clairvoyance from Charles Bernard's G Warstaff, letting him predict Sukuna's movements. After that, he picked up a sword containing Sukuna's own cleave. Finally, he attempted to end it all with maximum output Jacob's Ladder, hoping to weaken the connection between Megumi and Sukuna. Unfortunately, by this point, Megumi had already lost his will to live and had no strength left to return. Before Yuta could finish the job, Sukuna countered with twin meteors, severely injuring Yuta and forcing his domain to collapse. Womb Profusion is Kenjaku's domain expansion, but there's some debate about its origins. Some theories suggest it might have come from Kaori Itadori because of its sure-hit gravity attacks, or from Geto. We'll get into why in a bit. This domain expansion creates a massive, grotesque structure made of cursed spirit-like faces fused together. At its base are 4 bald spirits with eye-like markings on their shoulders, which are the only ones that actually have bodies. The rest of the domain is made up of flesh-like structures covered in stitch marks, all connected by limb-like organisms with branches growing out of them. What makes Womb Profusion even more terrifying is that it has no outer shell. Instead of enclosing itself like most domain expansions, it expands into the surrounding environment, just like Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. This makes it way harder to dismantle using empty barrier techniques. Tengen and Yuki Tsukumo originally planned to dispel it with this strategy, but this feature threw off their entire plan. Anyone caught inside Womb Profusion's range gets hit with a guaranteed attack that has the same explosive force as Geto's maximum Uzumaki. It even overpowered Yuki's simple domain within seconds. Yuki was severely injured by the domain's guaranteed hit, but Tengen ultimately managed to dispel it by targeting the edge of the attack's area of effect. Now, let's talk about why some believe Womb Profusion actually belongs to Geto and why others insist it's Kenjaku's. One argument for Geto is that Womb Profusion's sure-hit attack closely resembles maximum Uzumaki. This theory gained support from the fact that Yuta took over Gojo's body. He was able to use Gojo's domain expansion. If that's true, then Kenjaku could also use Geto's domain. Well, if Geto actually had one. However, the name itself complicates things. Profusion means abundance, so Womb Profusion could mean the abundance of wombs. This fits perfectly with Kenjaku's whole theme of rebirth and creation. On top of that, Kenjaku created the Cursed Womb, death paintings, which also have womb in their name. That's why some fans argue that it doesn't make sense for Geto to have a womb-themed domain expansion in the first place. Hold on real quick. Before we dive into Higuruma's deadly sentencing and the rest of the domain expansions in Jujutsu Kaisen, and break down what Yuji's domain expansion is, make sure you stick around until the end and hit that like and subscribe button. Alright, the barrier is set. Let's get into it. Higuruma's domain expansion, Deadly Sentencing, turns the battlefield into a courtroom, where he acts as the prosecutor, and his opponent takes the role of the defendant. Unlike most domain expansions, Deadly Sentencing doesn't have a guaranteed hit attack. Instead, it forces everyone inside to follow the rules of Higuruma's curse technique. What makes it even more unique is that it activates without needing a hand sign, and a binding vow requires Higuruma to explain the rules before the trial starts. Also, no one inside the domain can attack each other. If someone tries to use violence, they're instantly sent back to their position. At the center of the trial is Judge Man, a Shikigami who automatically knows everything about the people inside the domain. However, it doesn't share any of this information with Higuruma. The only thing Higuruma gets is a sealed envelope that contains evidence related to the defendant's crimes. This evidence doesn't necessarily confirm guilt, and Higuruma isn't required to reveal it before the defendant speaks. The defendant is accused of a real crime and gets one chance to make a statement. The same rule applies to Higuruma's rebuttal. If the defendant can clear suspicion, they win an innocent verdict from Judge Man. The defendant has three options: silence, confession, or denial. If judgment rules guilty, the defendant is punished, usually with confiscation, which completely removes their ability to use cursed techniques or cursed energy. Once the verdict is made, deadly sentencing dispels itself, meaning Higuruma is free to attack, while his opponent is left without cursed energy. That said, a guilty verdict isn't always fatal. Any defendant can request up to 2 trials, and judgment will always accept. Higuruma first used deadly sentencing against Yuji during the Culling game. Yuji was accused of entering a pachinko parlor, which is illegal since he's a minor. He admitted to entering, but lied about only using the bathroom. The evidence proved otherwise, and judgment ruled him guilty and sentenced him to confiscation. Yuji then requested a retrial, but this time, he was accused of mass murder in Shibuya. Without hesitation, Yuji confessed immediately, which led to the death penalty on top of confiscation. With Yuji's guilty verdict, Higuruma was granted the Executioner's Sword, a weapon with the power to kill anyone, with no exceptions. What makes this sword even more terrifying is that it only targets the sentenced soul. So, if someone has multiple souls in one body, like Yuji and eventually Megumi with Sukuna, the sword will only kill the guilty one. However, Higuruma, knowing Yuji wasn't truly responsible for the Shibuya massacre, chose to dispel the sword and let him live. A few chapters later, during Higuruma's battle against Sukuna, he expanded his domain again, this time putting both Sukuna and Yuji on trial for the Shibuya massacre. Sukuna, already understanding how deadly sentencing works, confessed immediately, not out of guilt, but because he wanted to get the Executioner's Sword for himself. Judge Man ruled him guilty and sentenced him to confiscation plus death penalty. However, Sukuna took advantage of a loophole. If the target of confiscation is using a cursed tool, the cursed tool gets confiscated instead of their cursed technique. The Coffin of the Iron Mountain is Jogo's domain expansion, and the first domain expansion we ever see in the series. Powered by his innate technique, Disaster Flames, this domain traps opponents inside an active volcano. The heat is so intense that most sorcerers would burn up instantly just by stepping inside. On top of that, the domain has a sure hit effect, and Jogo can command magma to attack his opponents at will. Unfortunately for Jogo, Gojo is far from normal, so when he activates Coffin of the Iron Mountain, neither he nor Yuji is harmed at all. And to make things even worse, Gojo's Unlimited Void completely overwhelms Jogo's domain, leading to his quick defeat. The only reason Jogo survived was because Hanami stepped in and saved him. The whole experience might have scared Jogo a little bit because later on, he didn't even bother using it against Sukuna. He knew Sukuna would easily overpower it, just like Gojo did. Chimera Shadow Garden is Megumi's domain expansion, and when he activates it, the entire area gets flooded with a thick, liquid-like shadow that transforms everything into a dark landscape. The whole space even shifts into a negative color palette. Inside this domain, Megumi can summon multiple Shikigami at once, move freely through the shadows, and manipulate them with much more control than usual. Megumi first awakened Chimera Shadow Garden in his fight against a Finger Bearer, and even though it was incomplete, it was still strong enough to push the powerful curse to its limit. Anyone standing in the shadow risks sinking like they're in quicksand unless they reinforce their footing with cursed energy. And if they do fall in, they'll just keep sinking as black toad shadows pull them deeper. What's crazy is Megumi's entire mindset before unlocking his domain expansion. As you probably know, Megumi always had this self-sacrificial view where he'd rather die victoriously than win and live. But once he finally took Gojo's advice to give it his all and be selfish, he basically flipped a switch and turned into a reckless, all-in sorcerer, though in a way that made him even more dangerous. A few episodes and chapters later, Chimera Shadow Garden reappeared during Megumi's fight against Dagon's domain expansion. This created a domain tug-of-war, which negated Dagon's guaranteed hit Death Swarm. But Megumi's real goal wasn't to overpower Dagon. It was to open a hole in the barrier so everyone could escape. Instead, this accidentally lets Toji enter. During the Culling game, Megumi thought about expanding his domain in his fight against Reggie Star and Iori Hazunoki, but ultimately decided against it. Since his domain was still incomplete, using it in that situation could have backfired if they managed to escape. So instead, he lured Reggie into a gymnasium and turned the entire space into his domain. Even though Chimera Shadow Garden was still not fully developed, it served as an extension of the 10 Shadows technique, boosting its potential by 120%. Reggie, however, figured out a weakness. Everything under Chimera Shadow Garden becomes Megumi Shadow, which means anything stored inside it adds to his weight. So when Reggie dropped 3 cars into the domain, Megumi had to bear their weight. Megumi countered by dropping Max Elephant on top of him, turning it into a battle of endurance. But when Reggie dropped an entire 2-story house, Megumi had no choice but to strategically dismiss his domain. Self-embodiment of perfection is Mahito's domain expansion, powered by his innate technique, idle transfiguration. What makes this domain unique is that it requires 2 hand seals, which are formed by 2 hands inside his mouth to activate. Once it's unleashed, Mahito creates a vast, black space surrounded by massive hands arranged like a flower. These hands are connected by multiple arms which grab onto each other to form a net-like barrier around his target. Mahito first expanded his domain when he was cornered by Nanami and Yuji. At that moment, he was inspired by the idea of death, and realized he could finally unleash his full power. Normally, for idle transfiguration to work, Mahito has to touch his target's soul with his palm. But inside the self-embodiment of perfection, his target is literally in the palm of his hand. This meant that Nanami's soul would be transfigured instantly without Mahito even needing to make contact. It was so deadly that Nanami once said Mahito's domain expansion is a guaranteed win, just like Gojo's Unlimited Void. But this backfired in the worst way possible. When Yuji broke into the domain by shattering it from the outside, Mahito was forced to touch Sukuna's soul, and Sukuna was not having it. Sukuna sliced Mahito apart, harming his body so badly that Mahito couldn't keep his domain active. Mahito later used the self-embodiment of perfection against Kokichi Muta, aka Mekamaru, and again in a few chapters later against Todo. This time, he expanded his domain for just 0.2 seconds, which was enough to force Todo to cut off his own left hand. This short burst domain expansion worked because Mahito combined 2 key steps. First, he quickly realized his own innate domain, and second, he activated his curse technique in an instant. Since he only kept the domain up for 0.2 seconds, Mahito avoided repeating his previous mistake and prevented himself from being attacked by Sukuna like last time. Idle Death Gamble, also known by its full name, Idle Death Gamble CR Private Pure Love Train version 1/239, is Kinji Hakari's domain expansion. It's actually based on a real pachinko machine from a romance manga called Private Pure Love Train. The whole thing works like a game where Hakari has to hit the jackpot. Just like a regular pachinko machine, he needs to line up 3 matching symbols of different characters from the manga. There are 7 characters in Pure Love Train, each with their own backstory. The jackpot odds are 1 in 239. But if Hakari wins, the domain disappears and he gets unlimited cursed energy along with an automatic reverse curse technique for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. This time frame even matches the duration of the theme song, Admiring You. His healing is so fast that it outpaces even Sukuna and Gojo. While Hakari never actually learned the reverse curse technique, the sheer amount of cursed energy in his body makes him heal on instinct. During this time, he's basically unkillable. Because its sure hit effect is harmless, Hakari's curse techniques information is forcefully transmitted and activated quickly to his opponents. In fact, its activation speed of 0.2 seconds is said to be faster than even Mahito during the Shibuya incident. The domain starts in a neutral mode where Hakari and his opponents fight. During this, he can trigger different visual effect indicators that influence his jackpot odds. Shutter doors and reserve balls, which are attack-based, have a higher chance of hitting the jackpot, while consecutive effects, on the other hand, are defense indicators that redo a sequence to reverse the damage. These effects come in green, red, or gold, with rarer ones giving a better shot at winning. If Hakari gets a rainbow-colored effect or triggers 4 consecutive effects, he's guaranteed to hit the jackpot. He can pick which effect to go for, but whether he wins still comes down to luck. If indicators pop up, the game moves to a Ricci scenario, revealing 2 of the 3 needed jackpot numbers. There are 4 different Ricci scenarios, but the one with the highest chance of hitting the jackpot is the final train, also called the Precious Last Friday Train Ricci scenario. It has an 80% success rate. That doesn't mean the other Ricci scenarios are hopeless though. Even if the hype level is low, there's still a shot at hitting the jackpot. Even if Hakari loses, the game just restarts. He and his opponents return to the normal stage, and the cycle keeps going until he either wins or gets taken down. His opponents can't interfere with the Ricci scenarios, let alone change what happens in them. Once the 4 minutes and 11 seconds of jackpot time are up, Hakari's cursed energy resets back to normal, but his curse technique stays recharged. That means he can keep activating his domain expansion over and over until he lands another jackpot. These jackpot numbers influence the next expansion of the game. Odd numbers give a higher starting probability, while even numbers make the spins go faster. There's also a hidden mode where the game speeds up even more, increasing the chances of hitting a jackpot. This is when Hakari enters the probability shift, the moment when he's no longer unkillable. But even then, the face is another way for him to secure a guaranteed jackpot. The Smallpox deity's domain doesn't have an official name, but it takes the form of a graveyard filled with ancient tombstones. This cursed spirit is one of the 16 registered special grade cursed spirits and has the ability to expand its own domain. Once activated, anyone caught inside is immediately trapped in the gravestone technique, which guarantees a sure hit effect. The target gets sealed inside a coffin, and with a simple hand motion, the Smallpox deity smashes it with a giant boulder. There's no dodging it. Mei even admitted that it had been a long time since she felt truly in danger, showing just how powerful this ability was. The way the domain works is pretty straightforward. First, the Smallpox deity locks its target inside a coffin. Then it buries them under a gravestone and starts a countdown from 3. If they don't escape in time, they get infected with smallpox, and their death is almost guaranteed. If you don't know, smallpox was one of the deadliest diseases in human history, causing millions of deaths before it was eradicated. However, the technique can only hit one person at a time, and it instinctively chooses the person with the strongest cursed energy to trap inside the coffin. Mei countered this by making her brother, Wee, the target so she could move freely. While Mei suppressed her cursed energy, Wee released his and used a simple domain inside the coffin to counter the sure hit effect. Dagon's domain expansion, Horizon of the Captivating Skanda, creates a massive tropical beach that looks so peaceful it actually ends up being the meeting place for Kenjaku and his group. He can activate this domain by forming a specific hand sign or drawing a cursed seal on his stomach. Once inside, Dagon's sure hit attack summons aquatic Shikigami that appear right next to their target out of nowhere. Since these creatures don't exist until the moment they attack, blocking them is nearly impossible, and when they strike, they immediately bite into the target's flesh. During the Shibuya incident, Dagon used this domain against Nanami, Maki, and Naobito Zenin. He overwhelmed them with the Death Swarm, summoning countless Shikigami that didn't just charge at them but also started eating them violently. As we already talked about earlier, Megumi's Chimera Shadow Garden expanded his own domain inside Dagon's, which cancelled Horizon of the Captivating Skanda's guaranteed hit effect. Later, Toji forced his way through the hole Megumi made, mercilessly obliterating the aquatic Shikigami, even the strongest ones, before defeating Dagon and dispelling the domain. Even before using this domain in battle, Dagon had already been expanding it casually inside an apartment while he was still a cursed womb. He basically turned it into his own private beach, for himself and for Kenjaku's group. Naoya Zenin's domain expansion, Time Cell Moon Palace, takes his projection sorcery to the next level by forcing strict movement rules on anyone trapped inside. The domain itself looks like a vast, empty black space with floating particles and a central stage, a flesh-like pattern leading to a massive eye behind Naoya. Because this domain is an extension of Naoya's projection sorcery, its guaranteed hit function injects animation frames directly into the target's neck. Anyone inside has to follow the 24 FPS rule, meaning they must move at a fixed frame rate. If they mess up, deep cuts appear all over their body, which completely immobilizes them. Inside this domain, it's like every single cell in the target's body becomes part of the curse technique. The moment they try to move, every tiny misalignment causes an explosion of micro cuts and deals massive damage. Naoya first used Time Cell Moon Palace in his battle against Maki, Hagane Daido, and Rokujushi Mio after being pushed to his limits as a vengeful cursed spirit. He trapped Daido and Mio inside, piercing 2 lines of film into their necks. At first, the domain's effects weren't visible while standing still, so Daido and Mio thought the technique had misfired and tried to attack. But because of the 24 FPS rule, their bodies took massive damage. Mio collapsed and Daido lost his hand when he threw the split soul katana, but Maki caught the sword and ran it straight through Naoya's chest. You see, because Maki has no cursed energy, she considers barrier techniques the same as buildings or structures. Unless the barrier uses a physical object as its shell, like what Megumi did with the gymnasium in his fight against Reggie, or unless Maki agrees to the condition of the domain, which, why would she, Maki cannot be trapped inside a domain. Time Cell Moon Palace's sure hit effect had no way of recognizing Maki. Threefold Affliction, also known as True Unfettered Love, 3 Layers of Affliction, is Yorozu's domain expansion, powered by her innate technique, Construction. When she expands this domain, it creates a mostly empty space filled with a strange floating organic structure that looks like disembodied insect brains and nerve cords. The domain's guaranteed hit function applies to anything Yorozu constructs and makes sure they land exactly where she wants. Yorozu expanded Threefold Affliction after creating a perfect sphere, opening her domain to guarantee that it would strike Sukuna. However, when she saw Sukuna completely unfazed by both the sphere and her domain, she hesitated and never activated her curse technique. That hesitation cost her. Sukuna summoned Mahoraga, who effortlessly shattered the perfect sphere, took Yorozu down, and wiped out the domain completely. Yuji Itadori's domain expansion finally appeared in the final stages of the series. It doesn't have an official name, but fans often call it Hometown Domain since it perfectly recreates Yuji's childhood home. This domain was first seen in chapter 264 during Yuji's battle with Sukuna. At this point, Yuji's soul-cleaving dismantle, which specifically targets the barrier between Sukuna and Megumi's souls, kept getting dodged. To guarantee that his attacks would land, Yuji needed a technique that would ensure a direct hit. That's when he performed a hand sign and expanded his domain. Thanks to his switch training with Kusakabe, where he learned the fundamentals of barrier techniques, Yuji became capable of expanding his unnamed domain. Inside the hometown domain, everything from Yuji's past is recreated in stunning detail. His childhood park, a train station, a department store, a farm he visited, and even animals like crayfish, horses, and geese. The strangest part is, even Yuji himself doesn't fully understand why it looks like this or what exactly it does. However, its purpose seems to be for Yuji to communicate with Sukuna, perhaps to reminisce about his past or show him the places from his childhood. Yuji wants to let him see the humanity of someone other than himself, someone he sees no value in. This is Yuji's way of showing kindness to Sukuna. He pities him. With this domain, Yuji knows that he can put an end to the King of Curses. So Yuji gives him a choice. If he releases Megumi and returns to his body, he will spare his life. Of course, Sukuna refuses, and this leads to an intense battle inside the domain. With no way to escape its sure hit effect, Yuji lands blow after blow, weakening Sukuna. This even stirs Megumi's soul just enough to disrupt Sukuna's use of 10 shadows. Then, Nobara's resonance deals a devastating hit, preventing Sukuna from expanding his own domain. That means Yuji's soul-rending dismantle is guaranteed to connect. With one last black flash, Yuji delivers the finishing blow, finally forcing Sukuna out of Megumi's body. But now that you know about every domain expansion in Jujutsu Kaisen, why not check out our videos on other amazing animes like Blue Lock and Sakamoto Days? We've got plenty of content on incredible series that you won't want to miss, so go ahead and click the videos on your screen now.